Okay, so with this kind of prep for this restorative formula, I'm going to get back to some of the concepts of formulas in the poses and in the pose sequencing. Well, sequencing is the formula. And so we're going to work on absorbing the pose beginnings with some extended exhale pranayama. So I want you to sit in front of your bolster. I know this looks like I got like this purple belt around me, which I do. So I want you to place that belt so it's connected and buckled up at the top region of your legs, but you are going to kind of sort out the pressure that you want that belt to bring into your thigh muscles. So give ourselves a good, another 30 seconds to really kind of organize these props. You're going to center your back of your waist, right? Not the back of the pelvis as much as the waist, to the bolster middle. And then once you kind of let the back of the waist center there and you're in this core kind of curl, you're going to take a block. You have a couple of them, I'm assuming. So you'll have one kind of near your arms. You'll have your sandbag nearby. And I would encourage you to use that a little bit in the beginning today for the pranayama. My feet are going to actually wander a little bit out, not focus on them being narrow. And then as I lift up my hips and slide the block under the back of the pelvis, lower my head back to the blankets. I want enough height so that if I hold at the brain stem and kind of grasp on that area with my finger pads, you might work on pressing the back of the skull a little bit up and then trying to get some length there from the very top of the, like right between the shoulder blades, all the way to the brain stem. Give it a little bit of massage powers that you might have for yourself, even if it feels like it's just pulling on your head. And as long as your head is back, right, you're not trying to crank and tighten the neck up. Now, you center that belt so that when you tighten it down, it has this leg path of rotating in, like your knees are just simply going to touch together. And that's a nice orientation, so it's easy. And so we can go towards comfortableness when we start. So start to lengthen your legs so they're an extension of your core. Feel where the buttocks maybe kind of press onto that block. And if that orientation of your rear feels like it's kind of, you'll be able to change your props around even more comfortably at home. So if this doesn't feel right, you can do other things like put towels there since they're a little more squishy. The block might be a little bit of pressure on the rear, but I want you to use something that's firm enough if possible so that you can keep the legs as an extension of your core. Taking that sandbag across the mid ribs, as to get a feeling of that midsection. And then as that sand slopes and descends on the outer kind of corners, think of this sandbag almost as if it's like an organ, right? I know your organs aren't this big, but noticing that it does have this kind of quality of flexibility, like your organs do with breath. So we separate the feet enough so that you feel that restriction with the belt, but it's not going to maybe a harsh pull on your lower back. So find what works for you. If you can bring your legs together and keep that belt tight, and that's okay with your body, then go there, but find what works. And then we center the elbows and their tips outwards, and the back of the arms are progressively resting as the hands open and rest. Now, feeling where the emphasis here in particular with the movement of your breath. Simplify the order of your consciousness, where it is moving around your space, your room. So maybe letting your eyes relax could be useful. And as the pose process and settling in starts to take effect into your muscles, and then, right, the structure of the organs or the composition of circulation through them, we can feel that in the lung power in this first pose. You can hear it when you're discussing anything while you're in the pose, almost a little bit of tension around the lungs. So as we empower the lung force, you in-breath through the nose and feel the out-breath relaxing your mouth. If you're instructed to keep the breath really a little bit higher, maybe you focus on breathing in and out with the nose, maybe that's your instruction in life. Of course, go with what's familiar for you or you're learning, but for the purposes here, we're working with feeling the wholeness of the body. So maybe exhaling out of the mouth will be a little bit easier to surrender and connect to the core track of the body. So there's not as much gripping in the facial muscles. You can feel when the exhale lengthens now out of the mouth. Try to let that current of energy flow outwards and the body becomes steady. So maintaining that simple perspective today, perhaps. So as we coordinate the muscles, and then we emphasize loosening up the tension and then soothing and toning the organs. The duration in the poses is essential. It's kind of an essential service so that you can receive and absorb the potential for the pose. Now try bending through the legs so that you can feel the feet and their connection as they press. Now they're pushing down, and if I have my heels too close to my center, it's a little jarring on the knees, and it may not necessarily be jarring, like really difficult, but you could feel a tension around the knees. So I want you to notice that attention of the legs when the knees bend and the belt restriction. You could move the belt so it's a tad lower, and not knowing exactly where everybody's belt is or if it's even on, right? Your emphasis is to maybe move that belt a little lower so that internal rotation of the thighs is evident. And now I find if I keep my feet relatively parallel as I know it, and I feel my heels press down, my legs try to rotate out. So I'm going to rest the back of the pelvi on that block for a few more moments. And then we're going to suggest moving into a little more of a back bend pose, right? So the idea with the block is it makes it easier. This pose is often taught without the block, so it's a little bit more of a sculpting through the core body. So keep that block for maybe the whole duration before we end this pose, or you might try taking the sandbag aside if you're willing to search this one out. But keep that awareness of the legs distant from the hips so you're not walking the feet any closer in. And then you're going to push down into your feet and lift up the hips just a tiny bit so you can sneak the block away. But as you sneak it away, maintain that control in the pelvis and the legs and feel that kind of connectivity and circulation and thickness of the thighs. And as you let your arch of the spine get a little deeper, you're going to lower your pelvis and your buttocks to the floor now, buttocks down. And then feel that ripple of ridge of the ribs opening. They're definitely going to work a little bit deeper in the rib cage. And then as you start to let go of that belt connection, now the legs might push out quickly. Bring them back to that centered space, about hips distance, and hold the belt. And I want you to have it just shoulder width apart, not much wider. And then as it reaches back your arms overhead, finding that relative amount of circulation now through your spine, right? So we've added on the spine circ. Okay, now we're going to take this into side sage. So I like to keep this one so it's a minimal of timing, but noticing that once you shift your weight into the left hip, you might hold your belt for this time being. If that makes any sense, time being. You're a time being. We might hold that belt and then feel the hands pull the belt over to the left. Don't roll into your hip quite yet. So you're going to reach your hands holding that belt still shoulder width to the left. And then you're going to reach your arms over towards the right. So if it's completely confusing, you want to stay on your back, but if you can peek up at all, you're going to have your arms so they're over and you're going left to right. And you're working that circulation in the ribs. Okay, a few more moments. Still on the blankets, supported. Now, as the body centers, just keep it going now back to the left, and you're going to actually roll to that left outer side body, right? Take the belt away, and then see if you can creatively crawl into this neck shape and add a ball or a block on the inner right leg and feel where we want to work on in this formula today, getting these kind of higher dense pulls. And you'll find out why. What comes up after this pose will be kind of some intricate work. So feel where this waist lengthens with ease, and then maybe add on a sandbag. And once that sand is layered hip or ribs, we reach overhead. Perhaps you have a block under your hand over on the other side above your blankets. And with that left arm weaving between the props, feel the right foot relax. And then as that continuum of motion is reaching through the ribs, can you center down into your left hip? Can you maintain a little bit of the discipline of coming into the pose and then situating the props so that things sort out to help your body find some kind of inner balance within the pose. So if that is tensifying in an area for any reasoning, right, you'll want to reduce that restrictive sensation. So for instance, if your arm overhead is feeling difficulties, you might bend your elbow and kind of work through opening, rotating. You might gnaw at it a little bit or let that arm find a respectful resting place, whether the hand rests on the blankets, but I'm still working towards letting my head rest into the blankets and the waistband lengthening through this right side. Good. Relax your eyes. Feel the breath as it has moved from the front region to the sides. Now this beginning kind of layout of these first two poses is rather full body and kind of easy to get through, right? You don't have to identify with really specific little pieces of it, like what's coming up. So kind of notice when you're being in this shape, if there's any layers that are feeling continuous, like you're feeling your legs stream into the waist, into the chest muscles, and then the spine feels like it's all kind of releasing or lengthening. Maybe just the side feels some length. So give it a few more moments. Breathing. Ribs, intercostals, the sides expand and contract. And you might find before we move out of the pose that the brain, letting it rest into the blankets can be useful for the neck. So if I'm kind of using my ears a bit, listening more, I might generally turn my head up towards the ceiling. So you might focus a little bit on kind of that leaning down with your head. So you can feel the side of the neck relax. Okay, and as we come through the side pose and work our way towards sitting, notice the emphasis here in the back body, right? So I want you to move your sand off of the side, and then as we come to that left hip, kind of get a feel. So this weight is in the left hip. Come up when you're ready, and if you want to stay in that pose longer, you can. And when you come up, you're going to scoot up to the bolster, sitting. And then as I sit, I'm going to bring my right foot in towards the bolster, so I'm in more of a cross-legged shape. Left foot's going to be up on a block. Actually, the block is kind of nice to have it there. Or if you have the ball, maybe it can balance on that. It might be fun to try. But this knee pattern is pressurized on the right and losing pressure on the left. So we'll take actually, we might use a belt on this. Let's get a block and a belt and put a sandbag on the right thigh. So place some weight on the right leg. Okay. So when I have my weight on my right leg, I'm going to put the left arm, well, you can't really put, you're going to move your left arm up and then circulate the hand back. And I suppose, I don't know if that's really the exact, quality of observation here, but when I turn my hand, I'm actually also turning the arm itself. So we're going into the triceps, and we're going to do this for our twist work today. And, part of this is me noticing my body when I do a dose of practice. When I reach my left arm up, I want you to feel where that left hand moves back to the upper back, okay? It likely barely touches the upper back. We're going to be doing many of these arm patterns, okay? So get a feel for this. Now, if this is really too much, like, oh, that's a lot for me, here's another option. Take your block, bring it up, bend your elbows, right? Elbows lift up, and then the block maybe goes towards your back. Now that might work for you, a little bit of those, but again, if it's really hurting, then you're gonna pass on that and do some shoulder rolls for a few moments, okay? Now, I want you to switch the arm. So you're gonna bring that right hand up and then maybe turn that palm so you get that full reach and the hand to the upper back. So the left hand is to the right elbow tip, and you're gonna press back, okay? You can hear that cat scratching sound. It's very intense. Okay, you coming in? Okay, we got a whole herd of cats coming in the door here. This could be interesting. We'll go for it today. How about that? Okay. All right, so now when you start to work on that reach of the arms, I want you to take the arm pattern now. So you're going to bring both arms up, right? You still have your sand on. You're going to turn to your right corner. So I'm pivoting to the right, and I'm going to lower down with my hands to the block or the floor, whatever I can reach my palms down to. So now this left hip is kind of feeling a little bit of circulation through it. So lean your ribs down to the leg, especially if this feels like kind of different layers of poses, right? A little different. As you reach up with the back of the skull, you're going to bring your hands back to the bolster and help this left leg so it crosses over the right, and you'd come into a spinal twist. So you're going to feel that left knee as it's prompting up. This is where I want us to give some focus, is the arms. So we've got a blanket set behind us. That should be substantial for most of us to work with at height. If you need more, use a block as well. And if this leg crossing doesn't work for your knees, you put your foot on the block. So it works similar. In fact, sometimes that could be really nice for the arm to have that higher reach. Now, hook the right elbow to that left leg, press the arm into the leg. So there's this intra-abdominal pressure. So when I push into my leg with my right arm, I'm hoping this is comfortable for your shoulders. So if it's, you know, a little bit concerning, try to use the whole spread of your back to help you rotate. So instead of just like the arm pushing, obviously the arm pushes with back muscles. So as I push into my left leg, I'm going to rotate. And then as I turn my head to the left, maybe back behind. And then there's that pressure in the core. Let the abdomen rest. And then emphasize the exhalation lengthening again. So we're kind of back to that again. So feel that rotation through the rib cage. Breathe. See if you can straighten your right arm. So the back muscles in that arm have an experience of support for your rotator cuff and your shoulder. It could be a good thing. Now, when we hold the pose, we relax the breath. So this can be a defining moment for your breathing articulations, right? Especially when you're kind of looking around for, should I stay in this pressurized position or get out? So I encourage you to give it a few more moments and feel where your head is comfortable. Maybe it's not to turn it all the way to the left. Maybe tilt your ear to your shoulder, do a little bit of therapeutic motion, or keep it still on the top of the spine. Good. And then start to release the pressure of the right arm. And when you come back forwards, we're going to bring that left foot front onto the block again. Have your hands on the floor or the bolster, one or the other. And as you lean forward, the bolster could be nice. You could kind of hold your hands around and wrap them on the back of the bolster. So when you lean forward, you have a little traction. But notice this left leg and the awareness that's trickled through. I think these twist and hip patterns take, they're pretty advanced sensations that might take a while if you're kind of rubbing against tension. So use your props to hold yourself into support. And then we're going to come back, and your hands, if they're on the floor, come back up, uncross through that left leg. Take the sand off, and we're going to bring our feet forward, shake out the legs, slide off the bolster, and then take side sage. So we turn to the right. We have that blocker ball on the inside of the left leg. Even if that leg doesn't feel a residual awareness from this last few moments, it will likely come into effect here. So I've got a block overhead. I've got my ribs supported here into that layer of cotton. And I try to push into it with my, it's kind of interesting how when you get in the side sage, your ribs lay into it really fast. Like they don't have an issue with their tissues to get into this shape as much as maybe your neck and your shoulders, right? So feel how this dense layer of the core is centering. Make sure your knees are comfortable. And then feel that left arm work its way towards either over the side of the face, pivoting, or hand onto the blanket. And the importance is to monitor the neck and the circulation all the way up into the brain. So if the brain can find a restful position on the blankets, yeah, give yourself that moments here to let the ribs expand and relax. So lungs, and let them empty. They're as essential on the exhale as the inhale. So we sometimes feel the lungs mostly when we're pushing against, right, with the inhale. And then it's easy on the exhale. But you're working with those balloons, right, inside the body. So as you continue to fill them up, at some point that habit becomes, well, it becomes habit, I guess. The actions that you're creating with your breathing definition becomes a habit. So I suppose that's one reason to have a practice, is to create these habits to induce wellness in the lungs, even if it seems like a somewhat kind of simple thing to do with yourself. I'm sure that they are ecstatic to be in the practice. Now, as your left arm is either overhead, for some of us touching to a block, some it's resting a little bit in a different place. But we have a relative connection here to this left leg that we were just working. So you may notice that it changed some of the circulation. You may not notice a thing, or your awareness isn't there with that leg yet. So just keep with the program for a few more moments on the side sage. You know, when you feel that layer of reach through the left arm or just the left side, now, can you let the right leg draw as close to the bolster as possible and then let that hip center? So it's very comfortable for that hip. And now as we start to cycle the rotation, you're going to roll into that right side. You'll simply move the sand. It'll be going onto that left leg, so you could just push it back. And then when we rotate, we take the block with us down to the side, and then we scoop in that back. So consider like when you're in a cat pose, right? You're gonna move your back and then scoop and bring the core in and hollow. So see if you can come up this way and or any way to sit up onto your bolster again. And then feel where that left thigh is down, and we'll add the sand to it right away. We'll just put the sand on that left leg. We'll add a block in front under the foot. And then when we center into that position, this time we'll take a belt. And when you place your belt behind you, I think we got all our props, right? We're going to hold on to that. And I think the more familiar you get with your props, and you are ready to add a prop. So when you hold onto your belt, feel when you reach back, just inch, kind of try to edge out a little bit more support around the front of the shoulder. Okay, so one thing to kind of notice, in fact, let's take our belt up to our behind us, wrap it around at the upper back, and then hold the belt. Okay, so you're holding it firm to your sides. So pull up, push the belt into your back as if you're trying to get your back ribs to lift up. You're kind of scooping up, okay? So now when you bring your arms back where we just had them, I want you to consider that mid-body lifting up into so the front chest, right? The front spine goes forwards. You just work with that inner lift. It's kind of a life thing, right? At this point in life, I got to keep the core kind of with a little bit of inner lift versus dropping, okay? So when you're here, you're going to relax the grip onto your belt and then bring your hands so they're holding out to the ribs. And as you tip forward, Let's hold the bolster this time for the leaning forward for that right hip. Okay, but this side we'll go into with a slightly different track. Same stuff, but little differences. If the shoulders kind of have a resonating sensation from the last position, anywhere, front or back, just feel if you can get those shoulder bones to motion back so the area you had the belt that was touching at your upper back ribs, notice if that area kind of connects as if it was kind of buckled together. It feels a little rigid, right, to try that, but emphasize leaning and trying to do both things, a forward bend and centering the chest. Seems kind of rigid. Okay, so when you come back, you're going to cross the right leg over the left, and then as you turn to that right side, you'll hook that left elbow to the right leg and rotate. Yeah, maybe coming into it from all those perspectives with the center line of the body is useful. Keep in mind, these poses will be relatively similar session to session. You'll notice, oh, we do chest openers, side bends, forward bends, twists, inversions. There's only so many ways, right, that you will go, but your intention is really important. So feel where the arm is lengthening and where the right shoulder is motioning back. Feel the turn of the waist. Belly moves with the breath. So maintain the intra-abdominal pressure by the rotation with this left arm. If it's getting a little bit uncomfortable in the very top of the arm with the attachment, you might find that less is way better. So maybe you loosen it up. Maybe bending the elbow is causing some of that too. So you might feel somewhere between a little soft elbow, a little length in the arm. And then you're working with the right hand to stretch you back and twist. So to me, that's the bigger challenge, right? Is to get this right side to turn. Now you can always try to get the handle on your sandbag if you have one of those with a handle, and then feel if that just draws you back. Just a couple more moments here, feeling the turn. Now, as the hand lets go of the loop, okay, this time we're going to turn into that forward stance, and we'll have it as kind of a stance of kind of mentally, even though we're not standing, that this right leg is going to go into pigeon pose. So what I'm going to have us do, since this leg has been kind of boosted by this position, you can feel the muscles kind of warm. So when I take the sand away, I want to have my blanket straight behind, one blanket, and have your blanket extra off to the side. And we're going to uncross so that right knee is forward, left thigh is going to move back, and feel if you can use the body weight down into your right thigh, like you're leaning, the pressure goes into the right leg, rotating open, and the left leg sneaks behind you, okay? So as you rotate, so the right knee is open, the left thigh is straight back. If you find this is a variation that isn't friendly to your knee or just the arrangement of things, you can do the same direction on your back. I'll show that in just a second here. So here we are for some of us with this seated pigeon pose, and we'll be sleeping pigeons more than seated. So you'll lower down. If you've got a couple blocks, you can use those. You can also use your blanket, right? You could make it a little bit higher and put that blanket under your forehead. If that is mushable, right, it would be helpful for your neck to have that traction, okay? And if for any reason you're not in that shape, you can always scrap your bolster for a second and lower onto your back. This is the variation 2. Right foot to left knee and hold the back of the left thigh and actually pull. And if this just seems like a better option for you today, take it. There'll be plenty of variations in life ahead, right? So this could just be one for today. So if you get a feel of this as being a little bit more dense for your hip, take the reclining pose. Yeah, it's nice to actually visit both and then kind of notice what that feeling was, because it goes away right when I get up. And then take that second variation, right? And then kind of feel, maybe that's a worthwhile exploration for you, where the quality is. And it could be another time you practice the other one as well. So when you lean down, can you, for those of us in sleeping pigeon, can you feel that right seat rest into the bolster? You can add a towel on top of the bolster if it's not resting in. And as your head is down, take the back leg to bending and lift up the foot, and then feel that left heel move a little closer towards the buttock. Feel the waist sink down to the right leg. And if you're on your back, you're moving your leg in towards your waist. Same thing. So we're working on, as the pose goes into motion patterns, really trying to let the movement here to become emphasizing flow and movement out of the back of the pelvis and across the pelvis into the hip and the leg. So let the back leg lower, and if the toes hook under, we're going to come up to actually a table pose. So if you're on your back, you're going to come back up and then find your way into letting your bones find some kneeling. Okay, so with my hands positioned so they're opening, you might get a feeling of all these little parts that come to support you rather than kind of degrade parts, right? So if you feel like, well, this is coming up into some challenge, maybe your sorting out is going to be a little different. So if I'm feeling a little wrist stuff, I might really let the back leg be on my bolster a little bit more. And then move my weight back to my hips, bring my right leg back. And then as I lower my knees and table, I can spread the hands out and then round the back into cat. So chin towards the chest. Okay, now feel the arch of the back so that the movement through the hips is equally as important as rounding and arching the back is as equally important as the movement through the ribs. Okay, so if this is difficult with your hands down, right, what I'm going to recommend that you do is come up so that you're on the knees. It's going to either be wrist stuff or knee stuff, right? It's going to be one or the other that could be an issue. So if that's too much on your hands, come up and have your hands on either the legs so they're not pushing and flexing, and round your back so you feel the spine movement, and then feel the movement of the hips. So this is important, that this is equal strength in the ribs and the hips, not just all hips. Okay, now we're going to come back. Let's take this one. Let's move our bolster in front so it's out of the way. Let's come back first. So you're going to lift up the knees and stretch your heels to the floor, your head between the arms, downward dog. And if dog pose isn't in your repertoire today, put your elbows down, hold your hands though, and then lift up the knees. Okay, so one or the other. So when you lift up, you want to get a feel here for the reach back into the thighs, as if the thighs are a full focus of movement here in your pose. You're trying to keep the awareness moving back through the legs. Lower down the knees. Round your back through cat, toes under. And then move your hips forward and lift into up dog. So we have no bolster under our hips. It's a little farther down into the front of the spine. Okay, now come back to child's pose, knees wide, toes together, reach the hips towards the feet. And if that's a little bit pressurized in your knees, then your hips don't go as far down and your head touches down. Round your back up through that coiled position of cat. Feel the knees are a little farther out this time in up dog. So inhale forward. You can be on the elbows or on the hands. And then as you come back to a child version, instead of centering your head down, you'll keep your head still a little bit up from the floor, the hands open. Okay. And then as your toes hook under here, let's lift up and then walk our hands back and our feet a little bit forward until we land so that our blanket is here underneath your feet. So the tops of the feet, you're going to step up so the foot is on the edge of the blanket, the heels are down, and the hips, think of those hip muscles as reaching back and up, and the calves stretching as you lower your arms. And also lower the spine down. So feel where that arch is moving out of the spine and that flexion moves in. Now, some people might find with issues in the bones, some might find that they feel a little bit more protected if they're holding the back of the legs. Now, since we have the blanket under the tops of the feet, under the balls of the feet, actually, sorry, you're lifted up to stretch your calves. Probably holding your, putting your hands on your knees won't be as easy, this kind of positioning. So feel where your body is trying to balance right now. Step the feet apart as much as you need to. And then I want you to give a few more moments working with the calves. So if it's not really very intense for you, and you want a little bit more, you could take that blanket. You probably have to turn it the other way, but you might have to turn the blanket and roll it so you have a little bit more intensity underneath your calves. You're going to have to kind of measure that one with your calf ability. Might be too much if it's a big roll to step up on it. But give the calves a few moments here. Calf asana. I've got the most unusual cat that ended up joining here today. Ace, he's not the one that usually would come to a yoga class, but he's here. I wonder what will happen. Okay, so when you have the calves in this kind of vulnerable position, they're pretty vulnerable. They're certainly opening. Feel if you can let the branch of the ribs and feel it sink. Now at this point, the skin cells in the face, right? You can feel the facial change, right, with going upside down. You're going to scoot your feet back and step them as wide as your mat and hold the legs low as that your hands can relax onto the outer clutch of the legs, and let the weight of your brain relax down. Okay? Feel where the neck is surrendering. And you can tell that in this position, at this moment, for many of us, it might be clutching with the shoulder joints. So can you let your elbows flow open and relax the neck, right? So let the elbows flow open, the ribs slower and flowing down. It's a different way to fill up the lungs. It's a little more challenging when we're upside down. So do the best you can. If you're feeling a little winded and it's an odd breathing experience, then notice the strengthening here of the tissues, the lungs. You want them to be pretty hardy if you can. Get upside down, both directions, and not just the legs up. Now with the legs in this kind of stamped out position, I want you to start to flow your hands into the center. So I'm going to lift up my chest. I'm going to kind of move that blanket back in the center of my mat space where it is. And then as I walk my hands on forward, your legs are in more of that vulnerable state. So scoot the feet in to about hips distancing, and then walk your hands forward and come forward to the bolster. So you're kneeling, you're going to turn your bolster lengthwise so it's straight vertical under. And then we're going to try a little bit of this upper body kind of strength pattern. So I want you to lift up your knees and then lower down the top of your thighs on the bolster. So depending on your arm, not really just a strength wise, but also the wrists, this is going to be something that might come up. So we're going to use our blocks under our elbows. We're all different lengths, so it will be different for everybody in this group. Some of you that are real tall are going to feel like, wow, I don't really need these blocks. I could put my elbows down and be just fine. So if it works for you, use the blocks under your elbows. But I want you to have your palms, so they're facing in. My toes are under, that's a consistent reminder. And my elbows might try to splay out, but luckily the blocks are fairly firm compared to like my floor. So it holds me a little bit. So take a few of these kind of moments of the pressure down into your arms, palms facing in. And then I want you to lift up. So you're going to try to pull forward as if you're moving your roots of your toes, the balls of your feet back, and you're pushing to project your upper body forwards. I know you're not going to fly through the room, but I want you to keep that pressure down into your forearms. Shoulders back, create some strength into your shoulders. And let's not emphasize trying to pick ourselves up off the bolster. Let's just keep it so it's pressing down. If you're curious about that, you could try, I'm sure. But you're going to push into the balls of the feet and lift the left leg up. One leg will do. Both legs at some point, but one leg. Lower that left foot down and pick up the right leg. Now, if your back is really pinning into an arch, I want you to let the crown of the head aim forwards. So there's less of this pressure. Lower the right foot down. And now as we keep that lift up, right, we keep the brain lifting up, extending. Okay, now you're going to let the toes relax, tops of the feet rest. So you have got almost like pointed toes. And then you're going to lower your ribs and reach your arms back. So that's what goes up, not we can go one leg at a time, and then we reach both shoulders up and the arms back. So feel the ribs. You can kind of fly through your bolstering awareness, tipping a little side to side. Bolster tipping. Okay. So as the hands are lowering down, take a moment here just to feel the back strength. Okay, it might feel like a squeeze in the back, but it's certainly lungs strengthening, right? Most of them are in the back of the body. So it's partially a lung workout. Right? Notice your breathing isn't like 6 in breaths, right? It's like 3 or 4. So now we're going to lower down onto our elbows, not onto the blocks. That's what I mean. Knees relaxed. Ooh, that feels nice in the back. Feel the back kind of release a little bit open. Breathe. Okay, now as the hands slide back, you're going to press down through the wide fingers, lift up that core. Okay, let the left foot hook the toes under. Okay, now kind of visualizing is part of it, right? It's going to recruit some of those brain cells in a different way, just the visualization of it. So I have my left foot toes under. Now I'm going to lift up my right leg and actually step it to the top right corner of my mat, but it's tricky to keep that length in the left thigh and then step the right foot up. You can always come up to table and then take the step. So what I have is my left knee down on the blanket, my left thigh lengthening on the bolster, and my right foot is stepped out to that right side of the bolster, okay? So if it worked out for you to get that step up when you were there, let the left foot, the toes relax, and keep that external knee turning out of the foot rotation. Your elbows could be on the bolster, or the hands could be on the floor. Just let the leg rest into the bolster. Now, can you form a position where you're using your props to hold the body and not trying to articulate a demand that's not really organic for the shape? So use the bolster. It's an organic bolster. So as we come back, we are careful to switch the right knee down. Now, last time we had the leg lengthening before we stepped out with the foot. So you can try that version again. Toes under, step the left foot out. You can kind of play with it. Feel how you can move your legs around the connection to your spine. Playing with it so it's not always the standard this, right, where your hands, knees, and you step. It has kind of a little bit of a choppiness to it, but we've put ourselves in that position by how our habits might be too. So kind of crawl around. That's your homework. So as the length of the right thigh is becoming supported, the front of the leg, the quadricep, the hip flexor. So as we move into that hip flexor work, think of the leg as an extension of the core, but what is the extension of the core in a leg is the adductor. So we're going to move this pose in a few moments to pigeon. So I want you to kind of notice this thigh experience, any part of the thigh that you want to declare experiencing an emergency here. And then we start to move that bolster. I'm going to be a little cautious with the knee pressure. So I want to use the bolster as much as I can underneath my thigh. And then when I move my hips back, right, kind of equidistant, but when I turn the bolster to the horizontal zone, I'm going to walk my left foot across. And as it guides, think about these pathways. And this formula right now, we're on that left hip. So work your body into that position of lowering down on again, the blanket could be under your forehead. I'll show that variation too. So my weight is sinking into my left hip. Okay. My right leg could bend or it could stay down. So those that are there, stay with that. And those that are looking for variation 2 are on the back. Head on a blanket, left foot to right knee, hands behind right thigh, and motion in. It's still a quality position if your foot is on the floor for this one and the knee is out. You might actually find some kind of interrelationship with the core and the adductor in a very sensible, basic way here. So even if you're in the sleeping pigeon pose, you might recognize this inner thigh circulation, actually kind of how it's communicating, how it cooperates and coordinates in the shape. And so I like all these variations. I don't think I would think of one as better than the other. They're different ways to communicate into the muscles, especially if your hierarchy, right, is your brain. And then you can kind of let your body give you a little information about what's going to be healing and helpful. Okay, so those of us in reclining pigeon, we could stay a little longer. Keep in mind to maintain the lower back flesh to feel even. But that also comes into emphasis when you're on a seated sleeping pigeon, that you want your back muscles to be to feel pretty supported, right? So if I'm here and I have a lot of pressure on my left hip and I'm kind of leaning, it's going to be a little tough on my SI joint. So, you know, think about this iliac, sacroiliac, right? If you hold that side, it's that half of it. So you want that to feel like the back in the center, right, is able to be open. So if bending your back knee is causing some friction, then just beyond just a stretch, right, sensation, opening, then take the foot back and down. So a few more moments. Now the back of the pelvis is going to be moving pretty soon into an inversion. And inversions often, when they're legs up, have an arch in the spine, like shoulder stands, back bends, viparita karani, bridge, right? These are all, some are mild inversions, some are full. But they have a little bit of that pelvis base that helps you kind of get the legs up. So feel the final moments of this hip pose. If the leg is bending behind you, lower it down. Good. Yeah, and kind of notice where some of that circulation has aligned into the joint. Okay, now when your weight is to the left, what you're going to practice is coming around to sit on the bolster. And I think for balancing purpose, you might take Baddha Konasana right here. So feet together, knees out. So take Baddha Konasana, feet together, knees apart. Hands could be holding onto the ankles. They could be just on the kind of mid inner thigh. So you have that contemplation of the motioning to circulate the inner thighs. That's the emphasis before we get upside down, is that flow through the leg, that gravitational flow through the groins. So when you're leaning forward, take it to about 75% of your maximum, so the knees aren't getting more jarred. You can put blocks under the legs. This is kind of nice. Then I'm not going to overdo it. I'm backing off. So the idea is the circulation, right, in that inner leg zone. Now, when the feet are pushing, come on up with the spine. It's not very far to get back up to spine tall. Feet push, and keep pushing and pushing. You know, foot prayer, it's pushing and pushing. Although if you have your hands in the prayer position, you want to be pushing and pushing. But push into your feet and then feel the knees start to motion up, right? The more you push, then they're going to try to lift. And then as you lift up the knees and separate the feet, toe heel them to about hips distance. Bring the knees so that they have a mild motion out. Now it's 15% external. And then a blanket behind you, you're going to kind of toss it back. You've got your sandbag nearby. You got your blocks. If you've got a ball, keep it nearby. Okay. So the knees have a little bit of external. You're going to slide your seat so you're still on the bolster, but you're in the center front of your bolster. And then as your knees are a little bit out, you're going to slide down so that as the back of the pelvis touches, this is like what we started with a little bit. We had that same pattern. But when our hips are now up, I'm squishing my bolster. I want to make a dent in it. So the back ribs, the lower lungs, the lower lobes. And I want you to feel at least one or two ribs that are still touching that bolster. So I know most of it's the pelvis, but we want a couple ribs. So we're working with the rule of the rib on this inversion. So pick up a right leg, the one that has the R on it, and then lower the right foot down and pick up a left leg. And then feel the left leg stay up. Press into your pelvis. Now for me, I noticed my bolster's too far back because if I try to get my other leg up, I'm going to strain. So find a balance for that bolster under the back of your pelvis so that when you lift up your leg, then you start to entertain lifting the other one up. It's not going to be like a prolapse, like a real clenching, right, at the groins. So you're going to get both of your feet off of the floor and then start with a little bit more of that upward facing forward bend, right? So you're upside down. It's like the forward bend pattern for your hip flexors, right? It's the same. But you know, it's kind of interesting with the top of the thighs here. So what might be useful for us to start this Viparita Karani would be to have a sandbag on the lower belly. It can't go much farther because the legs are lifted, so you can't get the sand on your whole belly because you got legs in the way. But feel that sandbag kind of onto that top space and separate the feet a little bit so that you can still access the back of the pelvis moving into the bolster. Okay. Now the idea here is that this whole hip zone is supported by your bolster and your feet can circle, or if stillness is invited in your consciousness, stay with them being still. Okay, and as we move our sand to our feet, we're going to bend, and then that feels the back stretching. Kind of nice. So the sand is on the feet, and you might stay with that separation of your feet on the sandbag, and then feel the back stretching. Okay, and then as the time allows for us to move our feet up, maintain, and notice if your seat feels too far forward on the bolster, then you want to change it before you get upside down entirely. So it should feel as if your lungs are working. You can hear it in the lungs. Since this is now emitting a lot more force into my lung pressure. So I'm going to work on finding an equilibrium with the breath, or an equilibrium with my ribs moving. So flexing your feet. Feel that space. I know some of you have a grippy ball and like to have that right center of the knees and squeeze in. You can add those things. Maybe it would have been better before your feet went up, but those are things you could add to the experience so you can find a stillness in the shape and then let the body have that rinse, that flush of the legs. Separate your arms to cactus and be. If your legs prefer to be against a wall for this, you might take the moment now, you could, for a few moments to have that entire back of the legs supported by something you can relax into. Okay, for feeling where the mind centers back and the breath moves in through the nose. And the belly fills, but also the ribs are noticeably moving. That you can isolate your breath so it's not necessarily just in the belly and like everywhere, but starting to isolate. First the belly focus, then move up to the ribs, and the belly is soft and quiet. And then I would encourage you to let your chest be very kind of still and calm instead of heaving your breath in your chest. Just let the energy around the heart relax. Since we're already working on our vascular system, cardiovascular system being inverted, it's already a bit of a entertainment for that area. Doesn't need anything more to cause stress. I think this is restorative yoga, supposedly. So let's let it restore. So feeling the weight of the sand for some of us. And then how do the feet respond? Maybe they flex. Now with the back of the pelvis confidently supported by the bolster, you want that confidence to build. This could be a pure pose that you do daily. Just this one could be your home practice, homework, and then you can extend the time of this one out. So you want to feel that pure confidence of the back of your pelvis onto some height, whether it's blankets, pillows, right, bolster. It's nice to have a firm, dense item under the pelvis for this one. And we'll keep it one leg at a time here coming up. So what we'll do is kind of notice how your hip flexors are all fired up here on all cylinders, right? They're kind of fired up. So not every pose is going to get every spot, right? So that's why there's a few that we do. But when you bend your knees and you're going to work with moving your sand away, watch out for your hands, okay? You're going to stretch the left leg down, and I would put a sandbag on the top of the left thigh and take a few moments with your belt under your right foot, and then just lift up that right foot and hold on to the belt structure behind it, well, at the bottom of it, obvious. But when the belt is being kind of stressed on the foot, can you really feel the energy of this being more of a movement pose versus still, that you're pushing and you're pulling? So it's this dual effort, getting the right rhythm of that push with the foot, pull, right? And then let the left foot try to find its way of flexing. Okay, now where the sand is supporting, if you're using sand, you don't have to. It might be more than necessary right now for your nervous system to have more props. But feel that resistance in the right hamstring into the calf. Good. Now let go of the grippiness here of using that belt at the moment. You're going to slide it off your foot. And then as you move your sand off that left leg, bend both knees and bring the right leg down, put the sand on the top of the thigh, and then reach your belt under your left foot and lift it up, and feel if you can make the leg positionally pretty narrow, right? So I'm not trying to splay my right hip open. I'm trying to keep it all fairly in this containment area of the bolster, right? So you can't splay it too much. But as you feel that belt on the bottom of the left foot, try to kind of scrub your foot a little bit with the belt, a little bit of sensitivity with your skin, and then let that connective tissue be supportively stretched. So I'm pulling, and I do have some awareness of pushing, but more so that I'm being pulled by the belt and the leg is moving towards my face. You'll find your limitations if the foot really turns out or the hip joint doesn't feel stable. So start to notice those cues in your structural system. So when you pull, let your eyes relax, go into that awareness of the legs. Breathing either the belly or the ribs. Or if both works for you, finding what's the most simple. And as you balance the awareness in that left leg, we're going to bend the knee, loosen up your grip with your fingers for one. And then as you move that belt off, you're going to slide the sand and take the legs so they're both in that creased benting position. And when the knees are lifting, well, are they lifting or are they moving to your chest? Well, they've already lifted, they've been up. So when you put your hands on your bolster, I want you to get a feel where the back of your pelvis is, feel the knees rock side to side, kind of notice the tipping point, how far you need to go over to the side to get your hip stretched. And keep it going. Try to keep the knees going side to side so you venture. You don't have to have your hands on your bolster, but it might be interesting, a little different. Knees are going to swing a bit side to side so you're focused on your hips and your upper thighs. Very clear. Okay. Develop a little muscle memory of this, right? See if you can get a brain cell attached to the sensation when you're on the bolster, knees side to side. And then as your knees swing in to your chest, you're going to push your bolster. Feel the different level on your lungs, right? It changes, it gets easier once you don't have them lifted, right? The lower lungs. And then once you equalize that pressure, bring your feet to your bolster. Add a ball or a block between the knees. Either's fine. You go through spells of using one or the other, it seems, if you have two. So when you push into the object, noticing if there's an ability to have your knees so they're separating and they feel like the object between them is part of the whole picture. You want to have that. It's like part of the structure. Okay. So squeeze into the object. Okay. Now with the hands, with a belt, you're going to push into your ball or block and lift up your hips and slide your belt under your body underneath. So it's kind of under your rear, but on the floor, the belt. And then hold the belt so the palms are open. So I'm reaching a hold of my belt. My palms are open towards the ceiling, that is. Turn to the ceiling. And I'm going to let my elbows touch the floor and kind of relax into my elbows. Pull on the belt. Now, when I lift up my hips, can you pull out? So you're pushing your belt outwards, like you have restriction on the belt. It's not a Dynaband. It's not a rubber band material. So you have restriction. So you're going to try to really push out with your hands and let your shoulders rub down. Now, the blanket under your head could start to be an issue. So you might decide, enough with that. I'm lowering my hips. I'm just going to tuck this and move a little bit back. That's fine. That might be better for some of us. So if you have some issues with cervical flexion and know that you do a little too much of that, or your chin drops down too much, you have more rounded in your back than you ought to have, remove the blanket. So hold on, and I want you to feel the definition of the back of the shoulders touching. Keep the belt as a support, even if it seems like it's not doing a whole lot. Keep it. Okay, now notice the arm delivery and how that responds in your shoulders. They're brick-like. Let go of the belt and bring your arms overhead. Reach the hands back, maybe just the thumb touches down. And then lower your arms forward and down as your spine lowers to the floor. It won't go anywhere else. At least we know that. Feel the natural arch in the spine. Inhale, draw bridge. Lift the hips up. Good. Keep that motion going over with the arms. Okay, now in the next few drawbridges, you're going to go at your own pace. Consider the awareness of studying the movement of the pelvis and there is rigidity with this position, right? It's this direct line of circulation in the hip flexors and the spinal column. It's very hydrating for the lungs. So when you lift up and down, can you work on that lifting up, going really slow and manifesting the circulation as high into your back, all the way to your neck as you can, and maybe just stay with that for a few moments. Keep the head centered. Feel the impact of the legs to help you put weight into your upper back and massage it. And then lower the spine. And as the spine reaches, take some care that when your spine tractions down, since I can't see where we're all going with it, you want to get a feel of that slowly lowering and not being clunky. Okay, so move the block away. Windshield wiper, like we did before. We had our back on the pelvis on the bolster and we went knees side to side. Now, if you can find that brain cell and that muscle memory, and notice if you get a little more swing into your hip on this one. Feet are wide on the bolster. Swing out the knees side to side and let the back of the pelvis feel like it's contained, but now it has a little more swing. This is the final spinal. We're trying to get a little more swing in our hips. Okay? So when you move your knees in center, you're going to kick your bolster to the right side of your space. Yep, if you got a bunch of clutter over there, you might have to move some things around. Put your blanket under your head. If it moved away, one is good. And then you're going to place your bolster to the right, and your right leg is besides it, but not too close. Okay? So when you cross that left leg over to the bolster, feel that reach of the low back waist, and then feel it kind of strum through the reach crawls into the hip space and then over. Sand is on the external thigh and maybe a ball at the sacrum. Okay, so get a hold of your sand, pick it up, put it across your outer left thigh, and then let that left arm open. Okay, so get that feel here of the right leg either reaching a little bit, but then softening the knee. So feeling where both knees are in a bent state of experiencing rotation now from the hip up into the ribs. And then with that rib motion, okay, you want to find that equilibrium right on both sides of the ribs. So if you put your hand below the sternum, that space we often put the sand, right below the sternum where the ribs attach. You can feel each side, and you want to get a feel that has a little bit of a twist to it right now. Okay, so, and of course the diaphragm, it's going to be kind of visiting the base of that twist when you're breathing. Well, obviously you're going to keep breathing, so that's not going to be an option. It's not optional. So feel your head turn left and let your right arm be wherever it wants to be. It could be resting on your sand. Likely you're going to rest it on the floor and just be and breathe. Yeah, how can you be? Just be without agenda at the moment. Just let your body consciously soak it up, mentally as well as physically. Especially if you can be in a Zoom practice where you have a moment where you think maybe something happened with the class. That's like when you're wanting to be in the pose. At least I've had that experience where I looked up thinking something had happened, but we were just in the pose. Now with, you know, a little bit of caution, maybe an abundance of it isn't bad to have on this one. You know, notice the little waves of movement you can cultivate for your left hip here. So you're going to be very individual with that, but the way that you put weight into your right hip, and then if you consider how you would move out of the pose, you have to be sort of conscious of not swinging around with the legs, the flexors, and, you know, causing anything that's any riffraff that's going to negate what you just worked for. So the slow movements are essential. And so if I move the ball and then I've got the sand layer, so I'm going to kind of move my knee closer towards my arm, like it's sliding it up on the bolster. Up to you. Sand can be off or on while you move that leg. And then when you move the sand aside, we're going to bring the knees completely in towards the ribs. So you're going to slide the feet and then scoot your spine centered. And then bring your knees in and hold the back of the legs or below the knees, depending on how your knees respond, and rock side to side. Try to let the rocking movement be movement on your back, not moving your tailbone like you're wagging your tail. You're doing actually positional, direct pressure on the back to massage that space. Very different than if you wag your tail. So when you come back to feet, I'm going to keep my feet off the floor to move my bolster. I find it's easier on my back, less strain. But some people put the feet down and then drag the bolster over. So just kind of notice that might be something you never really noticed. And then you go, oh, maybe it is easier if my knees are up. So you're going to use a different core strength to get there. So when I put the bolster on the left side, I'm keeping it very simple. Left leg down, and when the right leg moves up and over, feel now that your tail moves back. Well, it's only going to be behind you anyway. And then you'll put your ball, if you're going to use that, maybe first, try to feel the switch over with the leg. The thing that we can't see each other in the exact relationship of the assignment of the alignment. So notice that your chest is completely open as possible in this. If that's not possible for you, use a blanket under your right shoulder, use some things to prop yourself up. Maybe you want to start adding more props, like bring some towels or anything else that you can use for a pose like this. So this right armpit, the armpit chest opens, right? So the sand on, the left arm relaxed, and the right arm feeling that connection into the arm, pit, chest, ribs, hip. And assign that awareness to turning your head to the right and relaxing the heart. Yeah, feel how these very kind of high density poses that we often do in restorative, they're longer. The duration makes the difference, right? Psychologically as well. So once you become a little more still for a longer period with each shape, you know, you start to get a little bit relaxed at some point. So about now is probably that time. But interesting, a lot of these poses are openers, right? They're happiness building poses. So you might find it's kind of calming to have an opener pose and a relaxation at the same time. Opening into relaxation. Versus falling into relaxation. So feeling a few more of these moments. Left leg might get a little bit creative, right? You might bend the knee a little bit more. You might be on the very side of that left hip, and that is fine. So feel what gives you some play in the hip, like a little bit of circulation in your hip joint. Now I'm keeping a decent amount of focus lately around circulation. That's very opening for the knee and supportive of the hip flexors. So just kind of notice some of those changes. Some of you might prefer different directional angles that are issues that you might have in your tissues. So let me know what we can focus on too. So we'll spend the moments here kind of mentally noticing what the intention was, the lengthening of the exhale today. And our final pose, I do want you, once we kind of move towards it, to think about what that might be for you. That would be the most supportive of where you're at. So we'll have a couple options. They'll all be openers for the chest and the lungs. That'll be supine, right? They're a little more challenging for the lung force. But you'll have the option of legs up the wall or a fully supported bridge pose with the bolster under the legs this time. So you have those two options, unless you're going to go into like a shoulder stand. You can always do that too. So you do a medley of poses. The final sweep. So feeling this right hip. Now this time I still want us to address keeping the low back. So when I come up with my right leg, I'm going to take the props away, the sand and the ball. And then when I bring my knees over to that left side, I'm going to bring my knees in the center comfortably so that there's no real shock to my sacroiliac, right? It's like no sacrum shock, just bring the knees in, rock a little side to side. And essentially a bit of a full symmetrical stretch for the legs would be nice to do here. So we'll come around to either roll to the side or hold the back of your thighs and carefully hold and roll up carefully. And then come up and take one seated forward bend of choice. So I'm going to take my blanket under my seat and then bring my feet out. About the width of my mat is good. And then bring my bolster up and tip forward from my back. So we can actually do three different options for your final pose. The third would be the legs up the bolster bench, when you have your two blocks under your bolster and let your legs rest on it. Okay. So these moments, just a few more seconds right here. Now, if you want to stay longer, you obviously could stay with this longer if it feels like a relief. You could push a little bit and let your head center between the arms. Okay, so options are three. Bolster at the edge of the wall, legs up. We've done this before. Bolster on top of two blocks, legs up onto that bolster. Now we're adding many options. Legs up, okay, lay back so your head is on your blanket. And the third option I'll show because it needs a tutorial. So third option is opening up the front of the knee and the hip flexors. So you'll have two blocks in the front. You'll have a bolster, so it's lengthwise, blanket at the back. Okay, simple. Sit on the bolster, so towards the edge. And then you're going to put your feet on the blocks. And then when you lower down, we're not going to use the belt on the legs. It's too much extra stuff. Lower down so that the shoulder tips are going to the very tips of the shoulders. There's a little bit of lift here, but I can feel the lower tips of the shoulder blades on the bolster. That's important. So your shoulders, right, are in a comfortable space, and then my legs relax down. Now I have my feet a little bit apart on the block so that it's easier for my legs to stay, or versus they really flop out. Flopper. And if I put my sand on my core, then I'm supported. Now, if you're in legs up the wall, you can have sand on your feet or not. You don't have to. And if you're in bolster bench, sand is on below the sternum or on the shins. And in supported bridge, it's like if I can only get all the cats to do one of these poses, we could have 3 demonstrators. I don't think Ace is about to do anything but loaf pose, loaf. Cat is a loaf. Okay, so loafing it. So the elbows are wide and supported bridge, and the attention and the breath circulation goes immediately to the top of the lungs. So the respiratory experience is quite high and mighty here. So take your position of choice, and surrender the body weight into the props, whether it's the floor, the wall, the bolster, and let the eyes have that direct inward experience. So you're turning the focus of the lens, right, inside. If you have any hardware on your face, such as glasses, you might remove that or have had that off the whole time. And then as the emphasis of the inhale trickles in through the nostrils, feel the levity of the experience inhaling and exhaling. So we're back to that intention of lengthening the exhale. Simple. Now, if you feel the legs really spiraling and moving outwards, external, no matter what your pose, try to have that little bit of center line from the legs gravitationally towards the pelvic core, so that the navel awareness, the circulation spreads outwards from the navel. Okay, not inwards to the navel, but that opens. Navel center, outwards. Now with a few more seconds here, feeling your body touching the props, what can you ease and let go of? Let your whole experience be breath, shape, and letting go. Even if this is the only time of the day or a week that you feel like you can unwind and exist. So feel that pure nature. So we all bring awareness into our feet, slightly elevated for everybody. And then when we take our shift from this security of the shape, kind of notice that you have a base, you have security landing in the heart and the lungs for all of us. And so wherever your stand might be, you're going to move that aside. And then define the movement in your pelvis. So if your legs are up the wall, you get to bend your knees, move your sand off, bring your feet together, knees out, cobbler pose. If you're on the bolster under your feet, you could do the same thing, right? If you're on bridge, you're going to walk your feet besides the bolster, no sand on, and then you're going to push down into your feet, and then that bolster really was opening the lungs, so you're going to start to push the bolster with your hands down, and then let that bolster be away from under your rear and lower your rear on the floor. Bring your feet up on the bolster, and then feel that back stretch for a second. Just the feet up on the bolster is going to stretch your back just the right amount. That's the important part, is that subtle back lengthening, very small. So if you pick up your feet and bring your knees in, it stretches it further, right? So taking that position, for all of us, knees are bending. That's one way we get back to sitting upright, is to bend the knees in, and when we're back. And then you're going to roll to the side and let your hands push and direct you up. So take a bolster. You might sit against the wall. You might be in the center, but a few moments together. So we have a little collective because we are live in the practice, some of us right now, those of you here. And then where the hips are centered on the bolster, bring your hands up and let the palms gently press in. The thumbs move back into the heart and bow brain down to your heart center and surrender there. Breathing in together, breathing in wellness, and exhale, bowing into the space behind your heart. In gratitude, namaste. Thank you. Okay. Well, Ace was here for the class. I should bring Ace in.